On Blowing Hot and Cold this evening, we're going to hear about the June monsoon washing away Britain's sensational spring. I'm being actually deluged myself by weather experts this evening because on the show tonight are three of Britain's top forecasters. They are my co-host. He runs the Weather Outlook and he's also known as the owner of the hottest garden in the UK after it was the hottest place in the country in spring. It's Brian Gaze. Hello, Brian.
Good evening, Alistair, and good evening, everyone. Well, I think it was about the hottest spring, wasn't it? But now we've gone into a very it was very wet winter and then a very hot spring. But the rain's returned now, so at least my garden pond's filling up and the frogs are happy again.
Oh, that's good. Happy frogs. That's what we like to hear about. I'm also joined by BBC weatherman Phil. Sorry, beg your pardon, ex-BBC weatherman Phil Avery. Hello, Phil.
Hi, mate. How you doing?
Hello. Good to have you on the show. And also Leon Brown, who is head of meteorological operations at the IBM-owned weather company. Hello, Leon.
Hello, Alistair. You got it out there.
That was a mouthful, but I got there.
Yeah.
So if you're watching on YouTube, you might be wondering who on earth I am. My name's Alistair Grant. I'm Britain's top weather journalist.
You might well be, but you're also prone to going off track and talking about all sorts of other nonsense like shopping. So if you don't keep to what you're supposed to be doing, it's going to be a yellow card.
Oh, right. Okay. Yellow card. Okay, great. I've got my yellow card as well. And my yellow card is significantly bigger than yours, Brian. So it's going to have more impact. If you go into any meteorological nonsense, etc., I'm going to whip out my yellow card and also my son's to have some impact there. Which we try to keep things, reasonably mild-mannered, don't we, Brian? So we won't.
Certainly do. But we'll give Leon and Phil a sort of guest pass tonight, since they've been kind enough to turn up and put up with us.
Well, that'll be the first time in about 30 years in weather that anybody's been kind to me. So I've had the usual requisite skin grass for a forecaster, so that the skin is pretty thick. So don't worry about it.
Okay, great. Well, if you'd like to get involved in any of our challenges coming up, Phil, you're more than welcome to. So my main objective on the show is trying to embarrass Brian, who has pledged to do 10 press-ups when he finally gets a forecast wrong.
Yeah, and you've been trying for how many weeks now, is it, Alistair? How many
it's at least, you have actually had it right all the ones we've had so far, at least 3 in a row.
Yeah, well, I'm still training for the challenge, but hopefully it's not going to be put to the test just yet. Okay,
so to judge whether Brian should do 10 press-ups or not, Brian, what did you forecast 2 weeks ago on our previous show?
2 weeks ago, I predicted that we would switch into a more unsettled period of weather and that most of the country would see some rain at times as we headed towards this part of June. So I think I did well.
Okay, but you've got it right again. This is ridiculous. Can you please deliberately get one of these wrong so you actually finally have to do the press-ups?
Yeah, join the club. Come on. Get it right.
Well, I'm not going to deliberately get one wrong, but I do know that from past experience, when one goes wrong, it'll probably be the start of the session which go wrong. So
yeah, was that a particularly difficult call to make, though?
Well, I think that's putting me on the spot. I say they're all difficult as we head into the summer months.
Okay, so what would you say then, Brian? To sort of, what else could you do? I mean, going forwards, we want to obviously put your head on your neck rather on the chopping block. So what do you just going forwards? What are you expecting
from now onwards? What as a general outlook, Alistair?
Yeah. But I tell you what. You know what, Brian? I think you will put your neck on the block, but I'm going to join you here by putting my neck on the guillotine stand as well, because although we're going to be talking on this show a lot about rainfall, my view is that a hosepipe ban is actually on the way to the UK this summer.
Why on earth do you think that might be the case with all the rain we've been having?
Well, I'm so sure of it that I'm going to promise that if there's no hosepipe ban announced in the UK by the end of July, I will do 10 sit-ups.
Okay, well, I'm obviously going to keep you to that. It's too good an offer to turn down.
Okay, I'm going to stick to it. The reason I'm saying this is something that I can't actually say in an article I write for a newspaper, but I can say in this environment on a chat show. and that's that in particular reservoirs in the northwest, particularly the utility company United Utilities. Their reservoirs a few days ago, I know we've had some showers since, but you have to remember that only about 1% of rain that falls ever actually ends up in a reservoir. Their reservoirs were down to, I think it was about 68%. Their hosepipe ban they announced in 2018 were when their reservoirs were down to 65%. And
do you think it could be because they lots of people are working from home and watering their gardens more than they otherwise would be?
Water use is up, but water use is certainly at record levels. We've had the effect of the dry weather, which always creates a paddling pool boom. I did a story in my Daily Star today, which referred to water companies asking people not to fill their paddling pools while they leak enough water to fill Wembley Stadium 1,000 times a year.
Ooh, controversial.
Yeah, but what we do have...
True, I didn't say it wasn't true, but I'd say it's controversial.
what we do have, in addition, obviously, is people being at home, and that's the big factor in driving up water use. So although United Utilities say they're more resilient than 2 years ago, I reckon despite the rain we're going to have coming up, there's a hosepipe ban on the way. And of course, we have got rain coming up. And in fact, it seems to be a monsoon arriving in Britain. Is summer going down the pan? Because forecasts have changed significantly in the past couple of weeks. There's actually a phenomenon called the European monsoon arriving in the UK. So I'll just kick it over to someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Brian, what is a monsoon to start with?
It's defined as being essentially a shift in the prevailing wind direction, which may be caused by heating differentials between land and sea areas. So it's a seasonal thing, and it's often it leads to a predictable increase in rainfall potentially. I mean, one of the best known ones is the Indian monsoon season.
Yes.
Which obviously has huge impacts on the people who live there.
Yes, that does, doesn't it? And I've actually got a screen grab here, which I'm going to share with you, of the Indian Ocean monsoon. Where's my share button? Hang on a second. It seems to have dropped off. Let's find it here. There we go. Indian Ocean monsoon. So what's happening here is that the...
Whoa. Hang on. I'm going to get the yellow card now. Straight away. Here's a graphic. I use charts and graphics all the time. Here's one that just has lots of lines on it with dates. It absolutely means nothing.
Are you actually allowed to give me one for talking meteorological nonsense?
Yeah,
I thought I would give you them for that.
If I put a chart up like that without any context, I'd be yellow carded immediately. So I'm afraid, there we go.
Okay, well, I thought journalists have a get out of jail card for that, but obviously I was wrong. So let's see if I can plaster something on here which makes it look like a little bit of sense. So what we've got is winds in Asia which move from the northeast, which is their general direction, and that is from the northeast. They actually swing round to come from the southeast. Sorry, beg your pardon, southwest. Sorry, and you can see this advances the wind. Sorry, beg your pardon, the rain advances in bands across Asia. Starts obviously over here. We've got Japan going down to Thailand. Then we've got it coming into China. We've got it coming into India, where it came in a few days ago, and it goes right up towards Pakistan, and even Iran's not too far from up there, Iraq, by about 6 weeks or so time. So that's the progress it takes when this wind direction changes. You can see it takes, look, from May the 20th down here to July the 15th up there to cross the Indian subcontinent, and obviously it creates masses of flooding and very sadly lots of lives lost every year. And that's what a monsoon is. So we need to try and figure out how this is linked into what's happening in the UK. So what have we got happening with the monsoon, or this European monsoon in the UK, Brian?
Well, it's not actually a monsoon as such, but what we get is it's a great term to use, isn't it? But
you'll never get a job with the Sun with that attitude, or the Daily Express. No way.
Well, but it's nice catch. It's a nice title, isn't it, to describe the pattern. What tends to happen is in the late spring, the prevailing westerly winds, southwesterly winds, which come in northwestern Europe, Western Europe, tend to ease off. And then as we go through, so the rainfall amounts can be lowered because of that. As we go through June and July, the westerly winds tend to become reinvigorated, and it's not really, it's quite a loosely defined phenomenon. It's not, I don't think it's particularly well understood, but it's thought to be related to the heating of the European landmass, which takes place in late spring and early summer.
Yeah, those winds certainly have become reinvigorated, haven't they? And if I share another screen with you, you can see on here direction our winds normally come from. Phil and Leon, what do you guys make of this chart, which I've just thrown in front of you that you've never seen before? What it is it's a wind compass. It's for it's actually somewhere in Somerset in the southwest of England in the United Kingdom, but it's actually useful to be representative of, because obviously winds, it's not too different in the rest of the UK. And what we have is winds which are coming from the west, between the west and the south for the big majority of the time. We can see in this sector here.
One thing, Alistair, one thing that strikes me there just before Phil or Leon come in is as well as the majority of the wind blowing from the west or southwest, as that shows, it also highlights how winds from that direction tend to be stronger. And I think that's due to probably a greater pressure gradient, which often results from when the wind is coming from the southwesterly direction.
Right, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to jump in one of these, Brian. You just came out with a phrase that's, and look, my yellow card is so much bigger than yours. It's basically worth 2 or 3, maybe even a red. Because
that was the Met equivalent of taking your shirt off. It was such an obvious yellow. It just had to happen, didn't it?
Don't take your shirt off to celebrate, because that gets a second yellow.
That'll be me off. Get me off the show.
We're still in the first half, so manager's furious. Just you wait for half time.
Well, we haven't actually ever had a half time on this show, Phil, but we might have to have one with a stern talking to if we have any more.
I'm going to have one in a minute because the tea's just arrived with half an orange. Thank you, waiter.
Great. So yeah, I mean, what was pressure gradient? So that, if to use my journalist interpretation of that, sounds a bit like a squeeze on the isobars when we have high and low pressure really close together, and then we get a squeeze.
Yeah, I mean, there can be other circumstances, but you get, that's really it. It's where the isobars are tightly packed together, as you're saying.
I see. Yeah. So from the UK in spring.
We should just explain that isobars are markers, but areas of equal pressure.
Thanks, Brian. And I almost missed the second yellow myself by dropping that phrase in there. We really are treading on.
Very kind, yeah, I was being kind to you. I thought when you used the word isobars, it was a gift.
I'll just wrap up about this this chart, then I'll drop it off the screen and we'll ask Leon and Phil for some opinions. So just to explain to people who, for example, are watching on YouTube and might not have as much knowledge as some of the experts that are with me this evening, this sector here is the between west and southwest. You can see the vast majority of our winds in the UK come from this direction. This is the direction they're coming from the past few days, and they will be actually for quite a bit of the weeks ahead of us. However, in spring, we actually had a lot of air coming up from the south. We even had a couple coming down from the north. Those couple of very cold spells we had. Normally, after we have southerly air, we get a big blast across here from the west and the Atlantic and wet. But we didn't actually have that this spring. I don't know if I can get a bigger crossing out of that. What we actually had was some cold air from the north coming down. And so we ended up with cold for a few days before going back to lots of southerly warm air.
We had a day, didn't we, where the temperature was 25 or 26 Celsius in the south, and the next day it was about 14 Celsius lower as that cold air from the north came down.
Yeah, that really was.
That order of magnitude, it was a huge change.
That really was quite a change, wasn't it? And Leon and Phil, what did you think about this? I'll just drop the chart off, but what do you think about the this sort of spring, the switch from the homegrown heat and the southerly flow to the what we're having now? It's quite a shift, isn't it?
It is. You can yellow card me if you like in a minute. Can I share something?
Of course.
A graph.
You can, as long as it's worthy of a yellow card.
Yeah, I can't switch. You've labelled me from screen sharing, haven't you?
If we both yellow card you, that could be dangerous.
Yeah.
I was going to try and screen share a nice graph showing the North Atlantic Oscillation for the past number of months, and you see something very interesting that happened to it literally a week ago.
You're going to have to explain what the NAO is.
We'll just get the yellow card for Leon out of the way first, because he said the word oscillation, and that is definitely, I last heard that before I started doing weather stories in a physics lesson, I think. So yellow card's out of the way. Now he's got a clear hand to go ahead and talk us through it.
Okay, are you going to allow me to screen share? Ooh.
I've already done that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. I'm going to screen share something. So I'm hoping you can you see that?
We can see that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the North Atlantic Oscillation as a number, so it's an indices, and you can see a nice graph of it along here.
And Leon, what is the North Atlantic Oscillation for people that are watching on YouTube?
Oh, the North Atlantic Oscillation is the difference between the pressure up over the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic, effectively. So it's giving you an indication of how strong the jet stream is, or that push of air off the Atlantic.
That's right. So, the jet streams, those high altitude winds, they come across the Atlantic about 10 kilometers or so high, about the height that a plane flies at, and pushes our low pressure systems across from the west, bringing us rain and wind. That's correct. So as us meteorologists, we can make that into a number. So we either have a positive number when there's a strong difference, a strong pressure gradient or strong jet stream, or we have a negative number when it's the opposite. And because our weather in Europe is so dominated by what's happening over the Atlantic, it's a really good tool for us in the UK to determine what may or may not happen. But I was just going to show you here, this is 0. If you remember the weather changed in March, and then through March, April and May, it was extremely dry. Yes. You can see here that the NAO as a number goes negative. So most of that period, right up until more recently, was negative. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I can see, Leon, at the bottom there, you've got right from the 30th of March, all the way up to around the 18th or so of May.
One thing I'd say is, one thing about this is it's quite astonishing when you look at it, because during the winter months, during December, January and February, I'm going to exaggerate a bit now, but you struggle to get 2 or 3 days where the NAO goes negative at the moment. And yeah, we're seeing a period of weeks and weeks in the spring.
So we had that very wet February when it was a strong positive, and then it flipped, and it was, quite unexpected, and no one would ever have predicted it would last for nearly 3 months. But the other interesting thing is, you see, just recently it went positive. We had that heat at the end of May, and then we had that big change in the weather just gone, where it turned suddenly, as you were saying, much cooler. We had that big dive in the NAO. Basically, that was just because a big area of high pressure developed over the North Atlantic. That gets picked up by this NAO number and shows the change in the weather pattern. And that allowed the Arctic northerlies to flow down to us.
Yeah. Leon, can I just ask you a quick question for those listening in, and indeed perhaps for myself? This is not my long suit by any means at all. Is this what you're showing us here by any way of a predictive tool, or are you just looking at the observations and then saying, oh yeah, that's fine, and then we sort of match up? Or how much of a lead, if this is a predictive tool, does this give you in giving a forecast for us here in the British Isles?
So yeah, it is a predictive tool. So you can see the line here, this is now. This is all the different model forecasts, all the ensemble forecasts. By an ensemble, we run a model many, many times. It's slightly different initializations. And
Leon, that on my screen, that actually appears just a bit behind the images of the people on the weather who are on this. That's it, perfect.
Is that better now? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So the colours here are the forecast for the next 2 weeks. This is the GFS model, and this is the ECNWF, two global models that we tend to use quite a bit. The ECNWF is a European model and tends to be, we feel, more accurate most of the time. But you can see here that all of these models are showing a big positive push in their NAO coming up.
Okay, and so what would you expect from that? What would you say to people watching the show? What should they expect?
That is all because of, you may have heard of it, Tropical Storm Cristobal.
Okay.
Cristobal was a very early tropical storm. It's just now, you can see it here. This is a forecast, short-term forecast. It's just moving from Canada now, and it's going to move up towards Greenland and the North Atlantic.
Okay, that looks good. Yeah, that Cristobal, it was an early one, wasn't it? In fact, I think it was a record. They've never had three named tropical storms in the North Atlantic so early in a year. So, yeah, and are we already going to have some impacts of that felt over in the UK, do you feel, Leon?
Well, the impacts of it, we may not necessarily feel as you would expect, like we're going to get blown away and, you know, wet and windy. What it's done is it's completely upset the jet stream. We're downwind of that. It's going to turn the NAO positive, a stronger jet stream, and change the weather pattern effectively coming up in the next few weeks.
Do you think that may have the effect of inflating the Azores high pressure and having a positive?
That's right. Yeah, it's more likely to. The jet stream will be much more pronounced across the North Atlantic, and the Azores high will build. So we'll have this big pressure difference north to south of the Atlantic. Hence.
Yeah. So just to spell out, particularly for people watching this on YouTube, so on Leon's map that he's showing is, if Leo could just put his cursor over, say, Newfoundland, please, which is on the coast of Canada there, and the jet stream normally flows roughly across from around there or just south of there across to the UK. We've got over pushing up towards Greenland, ex-tropical storm Cristobal. So we're going to have, that's going to certainly, that difference is going to certainly have an impact on the jet stream, isn't it? Are you expecting some wet and windy weather for the UK indirectly caused by that difference in the pressure across the Atlantic, having the effect on the jet stream, pushing those systems to the UK, Leon, over the next, say, 2 weeks, for example?
Well, you were talking about, you had that chart of winds earlier. Effectively, what this is going to do is just strengthen that southerly, southwesterly flow eventually in the coming weeks. And of course, at this time of the year, anything from the south brings up warmth. So we're not going to end up in northerly winds. We're going to end up in more southerly winds. So what we're going to find is a big increase in temperatures. So I've got another chart here, just to quickly show you.
Okay.
This is a weighted chart for the whole of the UK.
Can that zoom in at all, Leon, please?
Yep. Hopefully, can you see that a bit better?
That's good. Yeah. Talk us through what's on that. I can see you've got dates at the bottom. We're obviously on the left-hand side there. 11th of June is tomorrow, and you've got the next 2 weeks going up to the 25th and 26th of June.
So this is the next 2 weeks forecast. This is all off model forecasts, and these lines here.
Just to spell out for people, sorry to jump in again for the YouTube people, a model forecast. I'm afraid Cindy Crawford isn't on the show this evening, but
yellow gardening.
Leon's meaning a computer models, basically weather forecasters base a lot of their forecasts, particularly longer range, on computers. The Met Office has got this mega computer. You know, weather organizations all have big computers, and the output here is showing, is it a sort of spread of like probabilities, Leon, with the closer you get to that, maybe the red line in the middle, or one of the lines in the middle being the more likely of that scenario coming off?
That's correct, yeah. So these lines here, this is temperature. So this is 10, 12, 14, up to 24. This is the weighted mean forecast for the UK by population. So obviously London, the southeast, is having a good weighting to this, but it's just showing you how the temperatures over the coming next few days will increase. This is the normal.
Sorry, just to jump in there. You said something very interesting, weighted by population. So could you explain how that's shown on the chart? I mean, if the population of the UK is about 70 million and there's about 9 million in London, how does that have an impact on the chart?
Yeah, so this type of chart will be used to predict the demand for energy. So you use a weighted mean like this. So the big cities where there's lots of people concentrated there, they're going to be generating a lot of demand on energy. Whereas people, I think there's hardly anyone in comparison to London up in Scotland. So if the temperature goes really cold in Scotland, it has little impact. If it goes much colder or hotter in the southeast, a much bigger impact on the demand.
The maximum temperatures on there at the top of the spread are about 21, 22 Celsius, which is obviously not particularly high. Could you just explain why that is?
Yeah, this isn't the maximum. This is the temperature averaged throughout the whole day and night.
Yeah.
So it's trying to pick out if it's a cold night and a hot day, or vice versa.
Oh, that's really useful, Leon. Yeah, because of course, weather averages in the UK, even in summer, the average temperature is only often around, say, 15 or 17 degrees. Sometimes in some, occasionally we get freakish nights which are up around sort of 17, but it might often be lower than that. So even that does show the warmth, doesn't it? Because you've even got 20 higher up that chart there. So there is some potential warmth. Are you expecting some wet and windy along with the warmer temperatures? And what sort of max temp would you expect in the next 2 weeks, Leon?
Well, you can see here, this is the mean, this grey line, and the weighted mean over the UK coming up in the next 2 weeks is typically 2-3 degrees above average. So if you apply that to the southeast of England, central England, you're looking in the low 20s Celsius as a maximum temperature, and a warmer at night by a few degrees as well.
Yeah. So how
about 20 Celsius over the 24-hour period, not the maximum at 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yeah, if you applied 2 to 3 degrees above normal, you could apply that to the max and min.
Yeah.
So Leon, I'll put you on the spot here. Tell me what in your view will be the maximum UK temperature in any one place recorded in the next 2
Good luck, Leon. Good luck.
I don't know, what, going to do press-ups or something after this?
Yes.
Don't start volunteering, because I'll be keeping you to it, and I'll be asking Phil, Brian and Bryce, and I'll chip in myself as well after you guys have made fools of yourself first, hopefully. So Leon, what temperature do you go for?
I'll put it in context. I was just showing you this is the spread. In about a week's time, there's a huge spread of model solutions, so the confidence gets really low. But at a guess, I would say 27 degrees.
Okay. Phil, what do you fancy?
He's in my ballpark. I would have gone something along the lines of 26, 27, given everything that he said there, what he's showing us at the moment. For the foreseeable future, I don't think that's a bad shout. But he always was pretty good. So.
Okay. And Leon, could you pop? Leon, have you finished sharing screens, or is there another one to show us? Because if you finished,
I can stop sharing.
Share it, please.
Let me see how I do that. Oh, stop share. There we go.
There we go. So Bryce, I'm unmuting you. What's your view on top temps? What do you reckon in the next 2 weeks top temperature in the UK? Brian, you and I are having it easy here. We get everyone to go first. This is a great plan. Bryce, what do you say?
I think around 26 probably. I'm gonna go quite conservative.
Okay, 26. You're in Phil's ballpark. You guys want to share the press-ups 5 each on the next show? Interesting tactic. Brian, what do you say?
Well, I've got to say, I was absolutely dreading Bryce going 28 Celsius, because that would have then pushed me to 29, which I did not want to do. But I will take a 28.
Okay, so I need to pick something now. We've got 26. There's no chance it's only going to be 25, I reckon, in the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to go 29, and we'll see how I get on in the next.
Gosh, we're bold spirits, aren't we? Talk about safety in numbers. 25, 26, 27. Pass the cheese, somebody. What a bunch of mice.
Yeah, I mean,
where's the bookie's favourite? 100 to 1 on 34. Go on, let's go for it, somebody. Goodness.
I'd normally be rooting out a big number here. I particularly would be doing if I was trying to write a weather story. But I'd be.
You wouldn't manipulate us just to get a story, Alistair. Surely not.
No, I tried to.
Think of the honour of your profession. Moving on.
I try to ask the same question in many different ways. That's my normal tactic to get the try and get an interesting answer, because newspapers, you see, if they were all conservative and sensible, people wouldn't necessarily read them. So they have to inform as well as to entertain. So that's the reason they have the emphasis on the section. But we're actually going to have a section on this, aren't we, Brian? Which is I'm
looking forward to it.
It's going to be loads of forecasters slagging me off and other journalists, while I, as a one-man band, try and defend us.
I've got my diary. When's that actually, Alistair, please? Can't wait.
Hopefully,
You do get this contradiction between forecasting and journalism, because obviously when you're forecasting, you hedging your bets all the time to an extent, and you're going to say the temperature's probably going to be this or possibly going to be this. But as a journalist, you generally want a definite answer, don't you? You don't like probabilities.
If you were going to go too much further down this argument, you're going to set me off, and we could have a 6-part mini-series, never mind a half an hour on YouTube. Honestly,
okay.
really.
I'll
Move on.
I'll steal myself.
I'm not surprised. Leon's fed most of the dodgy stories for the last 20 years.
I'll steal myself for this journalist bashing episode we've got lined up. So I just want to ask, we've done the max temps going forward. Brian, are you expecting, so we can hold you to potential press ups going forwards. Are you expecting some, some wet and windy, maybe some thunderstorms, localized flooding? What do you fancy in the next couple of weeks?
So the next couple of weeks, should I share my screen now? Is it a good time to do it?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, let me see if I can share mine out. So a lot of what Leon covered is similar, I guess. This is a different chart. It shows the output from another ensemble computer model from the GEFS. I actually think it was included in the charts which Leon was showing. And on the top half, what we're looking at is temperatures at above 5,500 feet above sea level. So we're looking at the air mass above the UK. In particular, this chart is for London and the southeast of England. So what we can see is in the short term, the upper air temperatures rise, and the thick black line here shows a 30-year mean. So we're getting above that quite quickly in the next day or so. And then these upper air temperatures stay above the average for much of the 16-day period.
That looks good for warmth, but what about the bottom there? I can see they've got some, on that rain chart, there's some pretty big spikes down there.
Yeah, I never like making predictions for rain. Temperatures is generally easier. But what we seem to have is a number of rain spikes in the short term. I mean, it's quite unsettled at the moment. There is a signal that's been appearing for drier conditions to develop next week, at least for a time, but I'm not completely sold on that idea, because some of the other computer models are showing a more unsettled picture. But this may fit in with the idea of the Azores High being pumped up towards southern Britain that we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I see.
So it could do, but then if you look towards the end of this period, we see a number of spikes appearing, which indicates the computer model runs showing the risk of rain returning. So it may not be a great end to the month.
Right. So what does that, thanks for showing your screen there, Brian. So what does that mean for people who are planning events? For example, obviously in the UK at the moment, we're currently allowed gatherings of up to 6 people outdoors, though, as we gradually come out of lockdown from coronavirus. What does that mean, Brian, for people who are...
Well, to put it bluntly, it's a bit of a pain in the backside, isn't it? Because if you're planning a barbecue or an outdoor event with a few friends, as you just said, you might find that it's nice and sunny when you start off, but a hefty shower could come along and put a dampener on proceedings, and then what the heck do you do? Because you can't leave your house.
And obviously, we've also got pub beer gardens reopening in a few weeks, haven't we, as well?
Yep, exactly the same thing, potentially with that more unsettled weather if it does return towards the end of June, early July. So I
might be sitting there in a beer garden having a pint. I won't have to go to the bar and ask for a top up. I'll be getting an inch of rain in my pint as we get a thunderstorm cracking overhead.
Yeah, I mean, some British beer is very, very weak, isn't it? But that would be taken into extremes, I guess.
It's going to be getting weaker. I see.
I think you'll do very well to get anywhere near the bar. I think we're all going to be served from a window from those pubs that actually do have the facility to have some sort of outdoor space. I think the real disappointment for anybody has been looking forward to this opening up of facilities, pubs, for example, is that what a spring they've just missed.
Absolutely.
You know, those attractions tend to focus on the sort of the Easter bank holiday or the Easter holidays. They really begin to open up then. And Easter was absolutely glorious. So were the half terms. And it was just such a whammy. Every day must have broken the hearts of thousands and thousands of businesses across this country. And we haven't really even spoken about the farmers who actually have ended up cursing that complete flick-flack that Leon so eloquently described earlier on, where they had all those autumn cereals to be drilled last autumn, soaking wet ground. You know, I heard the farming programs on the BBC where people were splashing through their fields, where they could have easily grown rice, but they certainly couldn't have sown autumn cereals. Then they get through to the start of the spring, and they're thinking, oh, okay, we've missed the autumn stuff. Let's plant some spring barleys, for example. Oh, no, look what's happened there. So they wait for the ground to dry up, ram in the seed when they can. The ground is probably cold and wet. And then, just when they need some rain to kick it on to make the damn thing sprout, they're hit with 2 months of continuously dry weather.
Yeah,
It's been an absolute nightmare. You know, we've been talking about sort of you know, the lighter side of it, if you like, but there are major implications for what's gone on across the British Isles over the past 6 months for one of our biggest industries, and that's the agricultural sector. And now, again, we go into talking about hospitality and the forecast that we're giving here now. Just when they had that crumb of comfort that some of them might be able to use outdoor space, we're talking about a British summer in its worst sense.
and what about Phil? What about, for example, for campsites? Obviously, that's a Cool Camping, which books for 600 campsites across the UK, has recorded their biggest ever sales day for campsite bookings since it started.
I don't doubt, and that's a reflection of the pent-up demand that there is from the British public who've suffered the lockdown for the last 3 months or so, and you know, many countless of millions, despite what you see on the various recent episodes, have played by the ball, and they can't wait to get out and be normal again once the circumstances allow. So I don't doubt for a moment that there is this vast demand of people hoping that at some point the regulations will ease, the weather will play ball, because we've, you know, our memories are short, and we have this image of, oh gosh, it's been wonderful, the queues have been bearable outside your local superstore and all the rest of it because you haven't been rained on. Thank God the April showers weren't there from that point of view. But now it looks as though, from everything we've been shown so far this evening, it's all going to go pear-shaped.
Yeah, that's certainly a concern, isn't it?
It's often a big problem in the UK, isn't it? Unless you get something like 2018, which was truly exceptional, or I think 2003 before that. It's very, very difficult to plan outdoor activities in the UK that are weather dependent.
Yeah, it's tough. What about looking a bit further afield? We've obviously got Spain reopening to tourists from July the 1st, with people allowed potentially without having to serve a 14-day quarantine, potential obviously for Brits to be able to go there, depending if there's an air bridges solution or not in the next few weeks. So what about looking further afield? We've obviously got this, the weather Leon's been talking about, with the Azores high. I mean, Europe was bonkers even early. Brian, weren't you caught up in that last year, all that early summer heat in southern Europe?
Yeah, I was in southern France in the second half of June last year, and the temperature reached, I think it was 42 Celsius during the days. It was absolutely scorching hot. I think it was probably the hottest weather I've experienced since I'd been in Death Valley. In California, which, is, many people know, is one of the hottest places in the world. So it was truly exceptional, the heat in southern Europe last summer.
Yeah, are you expecting, what's the potential for some of that, Brian, to get pulled up to the UK this summer? But obviously also we've got the potential for thunderstorms, haven't we, both in Europe and at home?
We do. I mean, at the moment we've got low pressure areas swirling around over the sort of Bay of Biscay, France, Spain. So it's going to be quite unsettled, I would say, in the short term, as you're saying, thunderstorms potentially. But then if the Azores high starts building in, as we've been discussing, that may well settle things down. And obviously you would always, if you were a betting person, you'd always go for Spain, France, Italy, to have the good hot weather in summer, the settled weather, as opposed to the UK or other parts of northwestern Europe.
Yeah, well, that's where the Brits love to go, and some may be going, but they may or may not have to spend.
I'm just wondering that if we sort of take that sort of snapshot of 2018, and I'm not going to build a complete premise on this, but if there were a trend to see that sort of temperature regime developing across the Mediterranean and the southern parts of Europe, I can well foresee that Brits, being more used to the sort of temperature profile that we are in this country, would look to go further north in Europe and perhaps explore the Low Countries, northern parts of Germany, Denmark, and up into Scandinavia and the Nordic countries as potential future holiday destinations. I'm not saying this year or next year, but I could well see that being a trend going into the next 20 years or so.
That's an interesting point. With the impacts of climate change, we might all be sunbathing in Norway rather than the Spanish costas in the future, I guess. Yeah, I mean, what about, Phil, what about gardeners? You've got a background, haven't you? Your background, I know you've done some...
I've done a bit. We've all done a bit.
You've done
Yes.
some, and I remember you used to be on the BBC show Gardener's World. So, I mean, what do you think gardeners have? We discussed farmers, but what have gardeners made of the spring, and what are they thinking going forwards with these sudden downpours around?
I think, I think that it's raining outside my window just now, and my word, the lawns and the verges of certainly of southern England, have been absolutely desperate for that. But I think gardeners are just suffering, or have suffered in the similar sort of way to the farmers have, but just on that smaller scale. The lawns have been brown. You've talked already about sprinkler bans and what have you, because the weather has been so adverse in that respect. You've just had to keep on pumping water and water and water onto the ground, rightly or wrongly. But there's an old saying in gardening that the seasons always tend to catch up. The farmers tend to pray for that sort of thing as well. If you get that sort of spring, then nature, if you leave it alone for long enough, tends to come good in the end. I've got a fantastic display, not that I've got anything to do with it, of poppies and self-sown more wildflowers into the garden just at the moment, which took over from the usual crop of daffs, which came through. It was certainly noticeable that the daffs were very much more on schedule this spring than they were in some of those crazier autumns and winters that we've had, where people say, oh, look, it's pre-Christmas and I got daffodils.
Crazy.
Good on you, but that's a bit of a worry, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly for gardeners. It's been one extreme to the other. Bryce, I want to ask you, please. We've just got a few minutes left, so Bryce, what would you like to ask any of these experts on the show this evening? I'm not included.
Okay, so
Nor me, Bryce.
so I see actually that there might be a couple of thunderstorms around this weekend, but I was wondering what are the most important factors when you're considering whether there might be thunderstorms?
Do you want me to have a quick punt at that one?
Yeah, go on then.
Leon may be able to give a better answer, but from my perspective, what you're looking at in the computer models is the Cape and lifted index forecast parameters as a starting point. They give an idea of the...
We'll have to yellow card you there because no one knows what Cape is, do they?
That's got to be a yellow. Yeah.
You're on your snow alley stuff.
I don't want to get a fellow pro booked, but if I had one, I'd be waving it big time.
So I'm off.
If he hadn't got one,
Yes.
I don't have a red, so I don't want to end the show early because I'd be floundering trying to come up with some meteorological answers. So
basically, what you're looking at is the sort of the potential. I was going to use another word there. The amount of energy in the atmosphere is what those charts are essentially showing. It's a bit more involved than that.
So energy in the atmosphere, that must be certainly due to heat, which obviously holds more moisture than cold air.
Yeah. So you're looking at things like heat, humidity, sort of pressure patterns. Even
A lot of instability as well. A lot of instability.
Yeah. Things like
if you've got air moving up in the atmosphere big time, taking with it lots of moisture, and then at some point it can't hold all of that, then stand by. You're in for a rumble and a flash of lightning as well, and a lot of rain. We had a trough come down here through Berkshire end of last week, and my kids decided to go out unexpectedly to me, talking about trying to forecast. My kids suddenly thought, let's go out for an evening run. And I said, have you looked at the radar? Because you could barely see through the window, it was so dark. And sure enough, down came this trough, and it was absolutely lit up on the radar. That was an easy piece of forecasting. And sure enough, bang, flash, wallop, down came the hail, down came the rain, the gutters were up.
Right.
Easy peasy. There's nothing to this forecasting.
I'm in Hertfordshire, so probably just down the road from you. I think it was last Saturday, wasn't it? It was absolutely atrocious.
Yep.
Yeah.
Not for very long, but while it was around, you knew about it.
I think we had
Don't
about
get caught out
12
with money.
millimeters of rain in an hour here, something like that.
Right. Okay, so and Bryce, just one more question before we wrap up for the evening, please.
You caught me off guard here. So often actually you see the term cyclogenesis. Like, what is that?
Oh, we're gonna have a separate section on that one. I think one show, because that is my favourite and every journalist's favourite weather expression. Who wants to talk, Bryce, through that briefly before we wrap up?
Over to Leon.
Yeah, I can quickly. Cyclogenesis. It's from the word cyclone, so that's a strong circulation. So it's an area of low pressure, and so you've got rising air. I don't want to get too technical, but the flow will be around that area of low pressure, and as that low pressure falls, the pressure gradient, as we were talking about earlier, gets greater. So the wind speeds get greater. That's kind of a simple cyclogenesis. I can't say it now. Cyclogenesis setup.
I see. And obviously, when we get that cyclogenesis setup, correct me if I'm wrong, and I am talking in front of three forecasters here, and Bryce, who probably knows more than I do. But the pressure tends to fall by at least, well, it has to, in fact, fall by at least 24 millibars in 24 hours. That's in old money the mercury. And it comes down and it creates potentially explosive cyclogenesis, which newspapers like to call weather bombs, because it sounds...
I knew we wouldn't get through the whole show without the mention of a weather bomb.
Yeah, and we will have we should have a section on weather bombs in future, shouldn't we? So we're just about...
just quickly say one thing. Bryce, just going back to the Cape and lifted index, which we sort of covered about thunderstorms. I've just posted a link in the chat section to the Cape and lifted index charts on the Weather Outlook. I don't know if you look at charts or which sites you use, but there's a link there if you want to check them out.
Thank you. I'll check that out.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Bryce and Brian. So our next video chat is in 2 weeks' time. It's on Wednesday, the 24th of June at 8:30 p.m. Thank you very much to our two guest forecasters for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, ex-BBC forecaster Phil Avery.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you very much to Leon Brown, who is Head of Meteorological Operations at the IBM-owned weather company. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you, Alistair. It's been a bit of fun.
Thanks very much.
So thanks to you guys. And don't forget, you can see the video tonight, Blowing Hot and Cold, on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. So, please comment on it and follow us and share it.
Yes, so thanks very much. Tune in 2 weeks' time, June the 24th, 8:30 p.m. See if Brian will be doing any press-ups or not. This was Blowing Hot and Cold. It's the world's first live weather video chat. Thank you very much, and good night.
Good night.